Aloha. As he said, my name is Chandra. His mom's name is Chandra, Mark. And I am a Master Sergeant in the United States Air Force. I've been in the Air Force for 18 years. And I'm from Ohio, and my husband's from Ohio. And we had to come all the way to Hawaii to meet and get married. Hi. So as he said, we are members of the Artis-Baham-Goldsborough chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen. So let me break all that down for you. Mr. Norman Artis is a gentleman that came here some years ago wearing a Tuskegee Airman jacket, and people started talking to him about the Tuskegee Airmen, who they were and what they stood for. And as he told the story, it got kind of around the island a little bit. And what we found out is that Mr. Philip Baham and Mr. Romaine Goldsborough, who you all know, are original Tuskegee Airmen. So what does that mean? That means is that they were some of the first blacks integrated into the Army Air Corps and eventually the Air Force. So they were on the ground floor when it was time for the military to integrate blacks. And so how many of you seen the Red Tails movie? All right, so the Red Tails movie was great, right? It was felt good. They went into the bar and they're, hurrah, yeah, you know, they're shooting down the Germans and we're winning the war and everybody's happy. And that was great, but that was the end. That was when they were finally successful. And Mr. Goldsborough and Dr. Goldsborough, his wife, and Mr. Baham, they're here to tell you about what happened before that. They have that original story, the stories about when they came home from the war and what things really looked like. The movie was great, but what we have here today is we have living history, and that's part of our mission. Our chapter's mission is to continue to tell these stories over and over again, and to have other people join us. That's what all these other people are here with me in red, to join us in telling this story all across the island and everywhere that we go. So let me give you a couple of statistics. There were over 900 members of the Tuskegee Airmen. That included pilots, that included crew chief, which Mr. B is a crew chief. That included engineers, like Mr. Goldsborough was. That included the logisticians, the guy that put the tires on the airplane. I mean, over 900 of them. Living today, there are less than 40 pilots out of 300. 300 of them were pilots. There are less than 40 living. And there are less than 200 other crew members living. So what we have to do, Mr. Baham, he's a young 90. Mr. Goldsborough, he's about to be a young 92. We have to continue to tell the story, because if we don't, then no one else is going to. And so that's why we're here today. We're here to give you a little bit of education, get you excited about aviation, get you excited about what they did for us. So first, I'm going to ask Mr. Baham to come on up. Mr. Baham was in the military for 4.5 years. He made it to technical sergeant right before some political issues kind of changed the horizon of the military. And he was in the military when the Air Force was born. So that's very, very, very huge. After that, he was in the Merchant Marines. Even in the Merchant Marines, he was making history, because he was one of the first engineers, black first engineers. And if you know anything about the Navy, about the water, that's very important. I'm an airman, which means, you know, I'm on the airplane side of things, but he was on the water side of things after he got out of the military, and he made history there too. But if you ask him how he feels about making history, he'll just tell you, what do you tell us? If I asked you if you thought you were making history.
I'm making money.
He told me, he said, I was just doing my job. So do you want to tell them?
Aloha. Now, let me ask you one thing. Where you want me to start, from the beginning or the middle? In the beginning. The beginning was 1941, when Pearl Harbor was hit. I was 17 and a half years old then. When Mr. Roosevelt says, I want you, you had no choice. So I went into the Army. I went into the Army Air Force. I stayed in there till about 5 or 6 months, then I went to school. They gave me my choice to be radio man or mechanic. Well, I knew mechanics because I worked for my father, who was a contractor, and he did everything that nobody else would do. So the point was, about a year and a half after I was in there, they changed it to the United States Air Force. So I got out of the Army Air Force, got into the United States Air Force. So I got like people say, well, how you got 2 discharges? Because there was 2 Army. I was in the Army and I was in the Air Force. It became just the plain old Air Force then. So then I was sent to Tuskegee in Birmingham, Alabama. We lived in National Guard barracks that you didn't need windows. You could just see through the boards. They were so old. We were right, any of you familiar with Fort Knox? Well, we lived right, the barracks was right across the tracks at Fort Knox. The tracks ran through it. We were on one side, Fort Knox was on the other side. Fort Knox people could cross the railroad tracks, we couldn't. You were caught on the other side of the railroad tracks, you was in a world of trouble. So to get in town, you had to walk all the way around half of Fort Knox to catch a bus, if they let you on the bus, if you was going to Louisville, Kentucky. I don't want to leave. So the point is I'm trying to bring up is, in those days, you didn't do nothing in that part of the world if you was out from that part of the world. What I'm saying is, you had 2 races, black and white. You was either one. And if you was white, you did anything you wanted. If you was black, you didn't do nothing unless you was told. We lived under conditions that was, I don't know, good. I don't think none of you was around the Depression. On the Depression times, where when we were kids, we used to go out on the railroad tracks with buckets, and the fireman would throw coal off the train as it passed by, and you'd take 2 buckets of coal home. That's how bad it was. But getting back to Tuskegee, the point was that in Tuskegee, nobody wanted the Air Force, wanted the blacks in the Air Force, because they was imbeciles, their brain was smaller, they couldn't comprehend, they couldn't do this, they couldn't do that. So we had a fire one time. One of the planes went down on the railroad tracks. In Fort Knox, they had barracks of German prisoners. They came down and put the fire out. After that, they could come across the tracks. We couldn't go across the tracks. But they were German prisoners. So things went on. At first, we had B-13s. I took the test to be a pilot, but in those days, 200 pounds, you was 200 pounds, you didn't fly an airplane, because there were none of them would owe you. But the point was, everything you needed, you had to scrounge for it. And if you know what NIS means? It means they're not in stock. When you went up to supply, we had to go to supply on the other side of the tracks. You present your papers, they tell you it's right there laying on the floor to tell you it's not in stock. Wouldn't give it to you. So when one plane would break down, we'd cannibalize it to keep the other. We only had 7 to keep the other 7 going. But things kept going down the hills, and one day, Mrs. Roosevelt came out to Godman Field, which was the name of the post across from Fort Knox. And she was standing up there. I was about 10 feet away. And she had all the civil service and the police around on there, whatever. And she says, I want to take an airplane ride. I said, you out of your mind. She said, no, you can't fly. She said, I want to fly in that plane with that man. End the conversation. Took about 25, 30 minutes to get her in the plane. She was a big lady. So Captain Arce he just made 2 flights, training flights, and he was standing up there in his full gear, parachute. He had no idea what was going on. They brought her out, they put her in the plane, took her up. He made 2 flights around the field, and he come back. They took about 45 minutes to get out of the plane then. So after she was gone, we got around Ozzy and I said, how was it? He said, how did she do? He said, that goddamn woman didn't stop talking the whole time she was up there. So to bring the story to a short, about 5 weeks afterwards, we could walk in supply with an order in our hand and they say, what you want? There it is on the floor. You don't need paperwork. Take what you want. So the word got around. Mr. Roosevelt didn't get much sleep when she went back. Because from then on, it went up. We started getting everything we need. They started fixing the barracks and everything. General O'Keefe, Air Force, came up. And he looked the place over. And they sent a whole bunch of white people out there. CO, all was trainers. They started training the pilots, because the mechanics, we do what we. In those days, you're not like the mechanics now. You did everything. You didn't have electricians or plumbers or nothing. You did everything. It would either tire change into anything. So the point was, we got the players we had, we got them all up on the line, we tried them, and they made out all right. So during the war, things got tough overseas. So said, we're going to send them overseas to war. So the 99th, and they had another bomber group. There was just beginning to pull up. The 99th was the fighter planes. There was 14 of them then. They sent them to Italy. Well, when they went to Italy, all we did there was bomb railroad trails, farmers' place, and things like that. They never went in combat. So the Sam O'Keefe general, he went over there, and that's when the, forget the name of it, but the B-17s, they was losing 75 and 80% of their squadron when they go on a bombing run, because they never had no protection. And the Germans would just eat them alive. The MAEs were just chopping them up. So he said, Jesus Christ, you got all those planes sitting out there, 14 planes sitting out there. They got guns in them, they got gasoline in them, put them in the air. Oh, they're not going to fight. They're going to run. They didn't run. In the whole time they were there, they lost 14 men, 14 pilots. But the story is, they never lost a B-17. And that's what they were famous for. And the point was, they turned out to be the better fighters they had there. Because the Germans had the better plane, but they didn't know how to use it. The Americans had the P-51, which is my favorite. They knew how to use it. So it went on pretty nice. All of a sudden, the war ended in Germany. They beat Germany. Germany surrendered. They brought the 99th back to Italy, and they grounded them. In the meantime, quite a few of us was taken back from the 99th before they went over, and we were put in bomber groups, the B-25s. They went down to Somalia. They were going to fly. They were going to Somalia. They were going to fly as cover for the B-29s. They never made it. The war ended in Germany. They grounded us in Seymour, Indiana. We were all set to go overseas. They grounded us in Seymour, Indiana. We never did get overseas. But the point was, from then on, most of us that was there, we credited with Mrs. Roosevelt for giving us the chance we had. Now, another deal is going around right now. Most of you have heard of the Red Tails, I think. No? Do you know how it became the Red Tails? Well, when they was in Italy, one of the best captains I know, pilots I know, Chappie James, his crew chief came up to him one day with a bucket of red paint. And he said, "Captain, I'd like to paint the rudder red." And Chappie took the can, he held it up, he took the brush, he held it up, they give it back to him. He said, "Paint the whole goddamn thing." So that's how they became the Red Tails. When they became the Red Tails, they flew every mission out of Italy and Sorrento and Ramicelli. Then they broke them up. They scattered them all through the Air Force. 2, 3 here, 2, 3 there, 2, 3 there. Finally, there was no more Texas Tuskegee Airmen. In the meantime, I got out. I did my 6 years in there. I was drafted for 3, up for 3, and I got out. It's a bad story, but I don't think you want to hear it now. I might get court-martialed now. But the point was, when they brought the bombers back, they started training the bombers by themselves, they started training the fighters by themselves, and then they combined them and made one group out of them. And then all of a sudden, they split it up. They were going here, they were going there, they were going, and they lost the name of Tuskegee Airmen. Anytime anybody believe you, want you to believe that you got hard times now, you don't know what hard times it was back in those days. You could walk the streets in a full uniform, and a white man's running on the street, you step off the sidewalk till he passes. You couldn't ride the train if they didn't have a seat in it. And if you had the seat and the man got on it, he wanted to pray and he'd take you off. And that went for enlisted men, officers, and all. So it was the point that nobody wanted to go anymore. Those that was in, when their time was up, most of them got out. You'll hear some of them stayed in there and retired. I don't know if none of them stayed in there and retired. But when their time got up, because there was no chance for advancement. The only man that had got any really advancement was Chappie James. He was the only black man that got 4 stars, become a 4-star general, and became commanding officer of the Strategic Air Command. So if anybody tells you that it was peaches and cream, they don't know what they're talking about. Now, everybody that's in the service now, I don't care what branch you get, I would say you get 100% treatment, but you get 99%, because they don't have to stand for it. Should I talk about my military seal of command or not?
Yeah.
Okay. After I got out, I went back to work for my father. Big mistake. Anyhow, I came to Hawaii for a 2-week vacation from a bad divorce. I stayed here 2 weeks, I got broke, I went to work. At that time, the Military Sea Lift Command was hiring. Anybody know what the Military Sea Lift is? Well, there was big tugboats that carried everything to sea, so the big ships didn't have to come in to get supplies. We carried bobby pins to be able to diapers to you name it. They needed it, we carried it. If they had troubles, we were sent out to assist them. I put in 24 years with them, but I had no problems. I went from what they call a wiper, the lowest thing on the ship, to become lieutenant commander. I put in my 24 years there, and I put in my 6 years of the military to give it my 30 years. I came back to Hawaii. And like they said before, I can't leave. Because where am I going? The scooter don't walk on water. So I'll say anything. Down the opportunities there. You got two things to do. Make up your mind and do it. It's there. There's no excuse. Don't say you can't. There's no such thing as you can't. You make up your mind to do it. It's open to you. So if you want a piece of advice, don't say no. Make up your mind what you want to do and go ahead. It's there for you. Thank you very much.
One of the stories that Mr. Baham told me that he didn't relay to you had to do with the German POWs during the war. On the military bases, the white German POWs had free reign. They went to the club and had drinks. They used the gym and all the facilities. But the African American military members couldn't do any of that. They couldn't just walk into the enlisted or officers club and have a drink. And so they would watch the POWs have full run, and like he said, he had to go on the other side of the tracks just to get a drink. And so those are the kind of things that they had to deal with. And what he's telling you is so true. At any point, they could have quit. Even the instructors, the trainers, the white trainers, they tried to make things harder on them so that they would drop out. Any point they could have quit, but they didn't. And that's something big to take away from the story of the Tuskegee Airmen. And so next, I'm going to ask Dr. Dorothy Goldsborough, whom you all know so well, to come up and talk to you about her husband, Mr. Romaine Goldsborough.
See, this is what happens when you pass 21. You fight all the time. I'm 86. My husband is 91. He'll be 92 on March the 6th. And he also, with Phil Banham, I want to stand up. I do better standing than I do. So I'll lean on the back of this if you don't mind. He also was in the Tuskegee group. He came from Massachusetts when, as he said, they felt they had to do their duty. He got on a segregated train out of Massachusetts and went all the way down to Tuskegee, Alabama. When he got there, he weighed too much. Romaine was 6'4.5" and didn't fit in the cockpit. But because he already had a pilot's license and had been working as a flight line engineer, they said, okay, we've got a place for you. So they put him back on a train and shipped him all the way up to Dearborn, Michigan to become a flight line engineer. And that's what he did during World War II. He's told you mostly all the story about what happened in Ramatelli in Italy and how the Italians treated them equally, were very kind and gracious and very happy to have him there. When Romaine used to come in here and talk every year for Black History, one of the most important things he'd say is, when we came back on the transport and we pulled into the harbor in New York, on top of the building, on top of the warehouse building, they had painted "Niggers Go Home," after having been treated as equals while they were in Europe, etc. He never forgot it. He went back to Tuskegee, and just like Mr. Bam, after the war was over, he said, I'm out of here. And so he left and went back to Massachusetts. Now, I can also tell you some stories about me during that period of time, some little funky stories. One of the stories that was always interesting, I come from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. You think it wasn't segregated? It was. And the only thing that I remember that was so good was we had to sit in the balcony at the movies because everybody else sat on the first floor, so we got to see better than everybody else for 10 cents at a matinee. And also, change was coming about because they knew education was the most important thing for all of us. Just like he told you what he did when he went with the tugboats and how he rose through the ranks. You used to have to test in high school, before high school. When you would be in 8th grade, you'd take a test. And what it would do is it would rank you and tell you what you would do with your future. You would be either an academic, a vocational, or technical. And you didn't make change. It's what you got in the test. That's where they sent you to school. I was lucky. Came from a hot family with lots of brains. My dad taught me to teach through the comic papers when I was a little kid, 5 years of age. I got to go to an academic high school in Philadelphia. Now, I'll tell you, it's always pretty interesting that when you go into a class and everybody else in there is Caucasian or white, and you're the only one. You have to have a lot of strength, a lot of guts, and you move forward. But I had no problems with that. I had the kind of family background that took me where I wanted to go. It didn't matter what people called me or anything else. Now, for Romaine, one of the things that's interesting is, you see, this gentleman doesn't look like he's brown, does he? Well, Romaine looks like he's brown. And he lived in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And he used to tell stories all the time about the various things that would happen between he and other students in high school, etc., except he grew taller than everybody. And so there he now had a little bit of an edge. He used to tell stories after he came out because he went to work for Sikorsky when he came out, which was also working as a flight line engineer. He then went from Sikorsky to General Electric. And he used to tell stories about how he would be training the military on the flight line, training them with the engines. And there would always be a few sort of in-your-face kind of, what we call howlies, in your face. And he would be very quiet. He always was. He never raised his voice. But what he would do is he would wait until there was an opportunity and he'd get one of them alone and he'd just pick them right up off the floor because, you see, nobody was 6'4.5" but him. He'd say, now, when I'm teaching this class, I want you to listen. You have anything against me, you wait till we get outside. But you don't do it in the class. And then he'd put them down and walk away. Now, what this is to tell you about Black History Month is, Black History Month has an important place in American history. Today, there is nothing to stop you from going anywhere, any place you want to go, but you have to have something going up here, okay? A lot of your technology is destroying your ability to make good decisions and to make choices. Not good, not good. Everything is not in that iPad. Everything is not in the phone. Everything is not on that screen. And much of what you see has been distorted to make money. I will tell you a little about me, which doesn't have to do with the Tuskegee Airmen. I went back to school at age 38 after I had daughters in college. I got a PhD at age 71, the oldest woman in the state of Hawaii at the time. And what everybody said, thank you. They said, what are you doing? I said, it's my give back. It's never too late. Nothing is ever too late for anybody. It doesn't have to be a division by ethnicity, by race, by culture, by money. It has to do with what are you doing up here? Are you moving this forward? And it doesn't matter what you do, but you better do it better than everybody else. You understand? If you're going to be a culinary chef, you better be the best going. If you're going to be a plumber, you better be the best going. If you're going to be an electrician, you better be the best going. If you're going to be running a small entrepreneurial business that sends people out to clean houses, you better be the best going. and you also have to have with it a sense of manners and respect. Now, as for Tuskegee Airmen, and as he told you, how few are left because of age, mostly because of age. But those who are around in Detroit, up in the other states, when they get together, they are doing what we are doing. They're going out to give back the history to the public so it doesn't get lost. There are some famous words that Romaine's niece says. We have a state of historical illiteracy that is going on now due to too fast-moving technology. So everybody slow down, okay? Learn to do a little spelling, learn to do a little multiplication, a little addition, etc., in your head, not on a machine. Is that okay? And I thank you for inviting us. I'm very happy to be here for Romaine. He would love to be here, but he's in a nursing home. He has been since last July. And I just came back from feeding him. They picked me up to come over here to be with you because he has dementia and he has what they call Bell's palsy. So he can't feed himself. When he holds his hands together, you don't know he has it. But as soon as he goes to pick up a fork, it all shakes off. He's a good man. And you know what? If it had been me and I was in his place, he would do the same for me. Thank you very much.
Can I give you a piece of advice? Don't say you can't, and don't get old.